This was her favorite time ever, right after the rain hits the ground for a while, and then everything is soaked in a glistening membrane. The baby Nasutoceratops slipped and slid on the forest floor, enjoying herself and squealing with delight. Losing her footing, she slid on her back all the way to her father's foot. Her father, the great big bull, grunted. He looked down annoyingly at his young offspring. She was the last of the 5 offspring they had originally together. His female Delaney grazed nearby, keeping a close eye on their last remaining offspring. Her name was Lebeck, and all of this was still so new to her. She hadn't been alive long, but now that she was big enough to leave their nesting ground, the big buck, Tholuman, led his family out of there. They were the last of his herd. There had been others, but they weren't so fortunate. The baby Nasutoceratops, who we'll call Lebeck, fumbled over her little legs trying to get up from the slippery ground, looked at her father, and shook herself, only to run into the nearby bushes. She was making so much noise that it was making the adults nervous. The mother barked out to her to be quiet. This thoroughly annoyed the baby Nasutoceratops, who decided to go farther away so that she wouldn't bother her parents with the noise, and so they couldn't bother her. And if they did call her back over, she would just make up an excuse that she was too far away to hear. But this became a problem, because now there were rustling in the trees right ahead of her, and her parents didn't hear it. Usually her parents had a very good ability to identify what the rustling noise was in the bushes, and they also deterred any smaller predators from coming after them. Of course, who would dare challenge her dad Tholuman, the greatest, biggest bull of them all, the one who has protected her family as far as she's been alive? She waited for her parents to give her the okay, but then remembered that they were too far away. With her chest puffed out, trying to emulate her father, she sucked in a great amount of air and then barked out as loud as she could, but because of her small size, it only came out as a squeak. The bushes ahead of her rustled, and in response to her cute little squeak was a deep, low, rumbling growl. Lebeck didn't want to seem weak, so she tried screaming at it again, and this time her cry was even more high-pitched than before. She stepped back tentatively, ready to make a run back to her parents. She vaguely heard on the wind her mother calling out for her, and her nervous stomping, trying to look for where Lebeck could have gone. Right there and then, the bushes parted, and out came a horrible entity. A large creature who has been known as the apex predators in these parts before the dinosaurs made it to the mainland. A full-grown male grizzly bear. Lebeck screamed and tried to turn around to run back towards her parents, but the ground underneath her, the detritus, was so slick and slippery with the water coating it that she could not properly gain her footing. This time, Lebeck really screamed a high-pitched noise that her parents definitely heard. Tholuman raised his head, looked at his female, and immediately headed in the direction of where the cries were coming from. His thunderous legs crashing through the trees were synonymous with the fearsome galloping of the malevolent grizzly bear, its eyes locked on the baby Nasutoceratops. The grizzly bear slashed out behind Lebeck. She squealed in total terror. She was taught by her parents that if she was ever in danger, to keep crying so they could locate her easier, and this is what she did, even though she was out of breath. Speaking of breath, she could hear and feel the hot breath of the grizzly on her haunches, the condensation of its disgusting exhalation intermingling with the sweat on her body. She detected trees crashing ahead of her. As the grizzly bear roared out, ready to make his final blow to stop her dead in her tracks, the baby Nasutoceratops watched as her father leapt over the embankment. She looked up in fright, not understanding it was her father at first, and everything seemed to go in slow motion as he leapt into the air. Gracefully as she's ever seen him, she watched, processing everything in her field of vision, as her father seemed to slowly dip his head forward to align his horns with the neck of the grizzly bear, who also seemed to be leaping. Like a graceful tune, one of the ends of his long horns slid seamlessly through the neck of the grizzly bear, and as her father landed, the grizzly bear was hung in the air by its neck. Lebeck watched as it struggled, its legs kicking and flailing in the air, unable to find grounding as it suffocated, gurgling in its own blood. A pool of blood like a red waterfall streamed out onto the already slick and wet detritus-ridden floor of the forest. Liebeck's father bellowed triumphantly, and as the bear took its final breath, flailing weakly in its last moments of life, he raised his head higher until the bear was still. He looked over back to his daughter and seemed to smile at her. With a huff, he lowered his head slightly so the bear's hind legs were on the ground. Then he stepped on them with his large foot, breaking one of the bones, while his heavy foot was placed on the broken legs of the grizzly bear. He pulled his head in the other direction until his horn tore straight out of the flesh of the grizzly bear, sending blood splattering everywhere. The bear then dropped to the ground, its throat now gouged. Liebeck could hear her mother crying in worry. For the first time, Liebeck ran to her father and nuzzled his leg. The father was taken aback by this behavior, but he allowed it. He didn't like showing weakness and was always alert. Delaney arrived at the scene, and Liebeck ran to meet her mother, grateful that she was still alive. This was the first time she's really come close to death, as this is the first time she was ever attacked without her parents by her side. Unlike Tholuman, Delaney, her mother, did return her affection. Delaney just about broke down. This was the only offspring she had left. She could not imagine what life would be like if she were to lose her precious Liebeck. A few days went by, and there were no special events that happened. Liebeck once again forgot about the danger and played in the forest. She was very tentative at first, after everything that happened. Every bush, every rustle in the forest was a reminder of the danger that she had experienced not too long ago. But her mother reassured her that if she stayed close by, nothing would happen to her. The Nasutoceratops family found a lake, or at least a collection of water where a small waterfall ran into. The great buck raised his head. Delaney looked at him and then looked around to see what was worrying him. Then she heard it. The very heavy thuds of something approaching. They carefully stepped back from the watering hole, and a behemoth came crashing slowly through the trees with a very long neck. It bellowed harmonically, and then leaned its huge neck down while parting its front legs so that it could take a drink of the water, not really caring that Tholuman was there with his family. Tholuman huffed at its insolence and mock-charged it, but the animal was so much bigger that Tholuman could not intimidate it easily. Honestly, this long-necked creature could care less that Tholuman and his family were here. He's come to learn that they're not really a threat. He just hoped they wouldn't drink all the water. The long-necked titan backed away slowly, having had her fill, and started to lumber back in the way she came. She stopped for a moment and then looked back at the Nasutoceratops family, then kept walking. Before Tholuman and his family could take another drink, there was a cacophonous noise as two great beasts jumped from out of the sides of the long-necked creature, and one clamped onto her neck while the other clamped down onto her tail. The Nasutoceratops family jumped back in fear as they looked at the two Allosauruses that they didn't even know had been hiding. Tholuman watched with his family in total disgust and horror as the Allosaurus, holding on to the long-neck's neck, started tearing flesh away from it. The other one let go of the tail and tackled into the creature, who now lost her balance, falling onto her side. The two Allosauruses ripped into the neck of the creature, suffocating it. One of them, with a bloody mouth, looked up at the Nasutoceratops family, chomping on the flesh it still had hanging out of its teeth. Tholuman swallowed, trying his best not to show any fear to his family, and backed away slowly, encouraging them to follow his lead. The two Allosaurus were already content with their kill, something that they probably had been following for a long time, so the Nasutoceratops weren't in any real danger, with them being fed. The reason why Tholuman led his family deeper into the forest is because of this very reason, but now it seems as though the predators have followed them there. Liebeck would experience even more death after having seen the grizzly bear gored by her father, because ever so often along their journey they would find carcasses of creatures they've never seen before, and some of the larger creatures that they have. Tholuman made the decision to go on the outskirts of the forest because it seems as though all the carnivores were converging inward. Delaney did not like this idea. She felt that they would be more open and exposed. But Tholuman assured her that this was the very reason why they did this, because the carnivores did not like that idea either, since they were the ones that were being hunted by other creatures the most. So they made the journey near the outskirts of the forest. They would be near the noise and the chaos of the humans, but Tholuman was certain that this would cloak their existence and hide them from the predators. And it did. Liebeck was so happy that they didn't have to worry about monsters for a while. She played and frolicked and even made up a few games with her mother. On the outskirts of the forest were always more fun because Liebeck would always find treasures. She's never been the outskirts of the forest. She was born in the depths of the forests, so when she saw all the colorful trinkets and items that the humans left behind littering the forest floor, she used them as her toys in an imaginary world where everything was wonderful and beautiful, where she was the princess of it all. Making up a lot of noise was not that much of an issue either. Whenever Liebeck would make noise with certain items that she'd find that reverberated in the forest, Tholuman, her father, would always be so upset, saying that the sound would carry. While they were somewhat safe in the trees, and the sounds would be hard to pinpoint as to which direction they were coming from, it would still augment the noise altogether and give away their location. But because there was some noise bleeding in from the outside, Tholuman didn't have to worry about this as much. But make no mistake, even though he looked calm, he was always on full alert. What he didn't tell his family is that what he saw at the watering hole scared him. That could have easily have been his family. He didn't even detect the Allosaurus's presence. He thought to himself that these predators are getting better at this, and this was more reason for him to stay alert. Because of the ever-growing danger, Tholuman felt the need to breed again. He approached his female, prancing around her. Delaney looked at him comically and ignored him, trying to graze on what little grass there was below. The same horns that he used to gore the predators is the same horns that he now gently used to caress her back and tickle her underside. Delaney, however, was not in the mood. She quickly leapt around to face him, only to follow up her intimidation with a honk. Tholuman, of course, thought she was playing hard to get, as she often did this, but as he tried to close the gap between them, she locked horns with him and pushed away his head. If he really wanted to, he could roll her over in an instant, but his female was the only one he would be this gentle with, aside from his offspring. Those deadly horns and his deadly muscular structure that were the very bane of predators that would try to hurt them were now the protection for his family, the blanket that kept them safe every day. Not wanting to tick her off any further, Tholuman backed away and went off by himself. If only there were more females around. It wouldn't be this much of an issue if one wasn't available. The more there are, the more chances there are that one would be available. And to tell the truth, Tholuman just wanted to relieve some stress. There were no other males around to spar with as well. Little did he know that the frustration that he felt was all due to his instinct embedded deep within his DNA, or at least parts of it. He walked off to go and sharpen his horns on some trees. Liebeck approached her mother. She smelled something alluring, something fun. Delaney was tickled by her daughter's curiosity. Whatever it wasn't too far away, only a few miles. If they were smelling it, it had to be very close. It was nighttime, and the predators would all be hunting inland now, so it would be even safer, as the predators seemed to prefer hunting nocturnally. There was less chance of them getting caught by the humans. As she did to her mate, she also ignored her offspring. Delaney yawned and then laid down on the cool forest floor. Liebeck annoyingly ran circles around her mother, trying to get her to go to the source of that wonderful scent. Eventually, Delaney gathered that it would be better to appease her curious and tireless daughter rather than to have to endure this nuisance any longer. So she got up and they both walked towards the scent. In only a few moments, they reached a camping ground. There were no humans around, and they've seen situations like this before where there were items strewn all over the ground, but the humans had left. Delaney assumed that the humans were predators, because only predators leave a trail of mess in their wake wherever they go. Liebeck was so excited that she found all these new items, she had no idea what to play with first. Liebeck joyously squealed with delight, her mother trying her best to keep her quiet, despite feeling giddy herself. There were treasures here, and tasty food. There was one specific thing that Liebeck had been looking for, but she couldn't find. Delaney urged her to come, feeling that this was enough. They've been exposed long enough and they should probably regroup with the father. But Liebeck insisted. Just one more, Mom. Just one more moment. I have to find that scent. In the back of Delaney's mind, she thought that her mate would be upset. He did always warn them not to go too far without him, but to be fair, he walked away first. Sure, she probably chased him away, but he made that decision. She made the decision to start this excursion, but now she was ending it. Because despite how stubborn she is, she knew that Tholuman always had their best interest at heart. And there was always a reason why he gave his warnings, no matter how strict they may be. As safe as she felt, she knew that she couldn't hang around for too long, because there have been other creatures that were captured by humans, and even killed. As she tried to get the attention of her excited child, she heard something, a whisper, a presence, in the foliage ahead of them. She looked up and cocked her head to the side. Something wasn't right. There was a heavy presence, and she couldn't explain it. Delaney walked forward, urging Liebeck to come to her side. It was only a whisper at first, but then she started honking frantically, urging Liebeck even more to come to her side now. Liebeck inquired as to why they should suddenly stop if they were safe. Delaney was worried, and the only thing that she could think about was now she was alone here with her offspring, and Tholuman was nowhere nearby. Her heart dropped to her toes when she saw a mighty male Allosaurus walking towards them, large as life. She couldn't tell if this was one of the ones they saw at the watering hole or if this was a completely different one. For some reason, this one looked more menacing than the others. Dare she say it, even bigger. That's probably because it was closer than she's ever been. Despite the fear that was seizing her veins right now, she knew that the one thing she wanted mostly was for her offspring to be safe, for Liebeck to be okay. She commanded her baby to go behind her. She wanted to be between the Allosaurus and the baby. At all times, the Allosaurus roared, and despite her fear, Delaney roared back, loud enough, hopefully, so Tholuman could hear. She called out to him. There was no reply. No crashing through the trees, no bellow in response to distract the predator. It was just Delaney and her baby. The Allosaurus circled them, and what scared Delaney to her core was that it looked through her with a burning gaze from the pits of hell. It then looked at her baby, and looked back at her. It kept looking back at her offspring, but then it looked at her intimidatingly, trying to get around her. This was Delaney's first batch, her first offspring that she's born, and she had no idea what to do. At some point in time, she stopped calling out for Liebeck to keep behind her, and she didn't even realize that as the Allosaurus was moving around her, that she was moving backwards without Liebeck, leaving Liebeck totally exposed to the Allosaurus. By the time she was facing the Allosaurus on the other side of the campfire that was still burning bright, setting a tone for this hellish nightmare that was unfolding before her, it was too late. Her one and only baby was exposed. Delaney froze, her breath catching, her heart stopping, as she watched the monster lean its large head right down towards Liebeck. Liebeck had no idea what to do. Don't move. Her parents always said, if a predator is close by, don't move. Liebeck wait there, trusting her mother to protect her, to do something. She knew if she tried to run, her mother wouldn't protect her. She had to stay here like her parents taught her. Daddy would come and kill this thing like he killed the grizzly. But none of that happened. The only thing that managed to get her was the Allosaurus. For the first time, Liebeck felt fear as she's never felt before. She thought that the grizzly bear encounter was the worst fear of her life, but feeling her head being crushed between the jaws of this mighty beast scared her more than anything else she's ever had to experience. It lifted her off the ground, and she felt as though her neck was going to snap. Delaney just stood there watching everything happen in slow motion, totally helpless and unaware as to what to do. The Allosaurus did not have the greatest grasp on the baby, so it opened its mouth momentarily so it could wrap its jaws even better around the head of the animal, so it could take its head off of its body, or possibly even suffocate it. Liebeck had no idea how her bony skull helped save her life. That moment, that little second that the Allosaurus tried to adjust his grip on the baby caused her to slip out of his mouth, and she hit the ground, literally running. When this happened, everything now focused in on the present, and Delaney snapped back into action. No longer was she frozen. No longer was fear her captor. Her body was then possessed with something that she's never felt before. Maternal rage. Rage that she froze up. Rage that she could have lost her daughter. Rage that she just wanted safety, and this thing was endangering that. That's all she wanted. She charged forward, fear no longer taking a place in her body and mind, and sent the Allosaurus sprawling onto his back. Liebeck ran for safety, watching onward as her mother fought this beast. She whimpered, scared that she was going to lose her mother. She's never really seen Mommy fight a monster. Of course, if her dad fought it, there was nothing to worry about. Daddy would always come out on top. But seeing her mom fight this thing made her worry. Mommy's not a fighter. Mommy's gentle like me. That's what she thought to herself, as she then saw the Allosaurus right himself and attack her mother. Delaney cried out in pain, and when she stepped away from the Allosaurus, Liebeck ran to her. They both looked onward as the monster got up and approached them, ready to do something. Maybe something they could no longer fight off. Liebeck looked at her mother in the darkness, and she saw the slick red liquid that was usually indicative of death. She understood that death meant that nothing would ever move. If something had red liquid coming out of it, especially a lot of it, and then it went still, it would never move again, like a broken item on the ground, the very ones that she played with. This terrified her. The predator came forward, and right there and then, Tholuman made his appearance. The great buck leaped out in front of his family, and Liebeck saw on this predator's face the same thing that she and her mother had been experiencing in that moment: fear. Tholuman nudged his family away, acting as a barrier between his family and this demon. The Allosaurus growled in frustration, but he wasn't stupid. There is no way he was going to tackle two adults, especially a fully grown male with conveniently much longer and sharper horns. The whole reason the thing decided to attack the female in the first place is because he thought it would be an easy kill. He'd seen these creatures before, and the female and offspring are weak. They're much smaller. Besides, with only one of them, it would be easier to nab the offspring. But with the father, well, the odds just were not in his favor, and he was not going to get hurt. Not like this. Tholuman assured his family that this beast would not be following them. Not for a while, anyway. Because even though they're stupid, they're not that stupid. Tholuman had heard his family, but he knew that the element of surprise was the only way to inject the most fear into this predator. He knew that in the predator's mind, if he could hide so quietly and suddenly appear, that must mean it's a possibility that there are others nearby that could do the same. Just like what the Allosauruses did to that long-necked creature. As the night ebbed on, Tholuman kept on alert. Delaney and Liebeck were still shaken up, but they were more than happy that the father was by their side now. They were never going to do that again. Tholuman felt guilt, thinking that his family had been safe on the outskirts, but now he had to rethink his tactics. Clearly, this forest was no longer safe. He's heard and seen some movement of other dinosaurs that were moving out of the forest to other places. Of course, there was less food here, much less cover. But for him, it would be better to see everything out in the open. They would risk being in captivity again. But right now, all Tholuman wanted was what was best for his family. Besides, staying in this forest was going to be more taxing than they wanted, especially since Delaney was bleeding. He stood by her side, licking her wounds. Thankfully, they weren't too deep, but she was in pain. After a few days of Tholuman securing the perimeter, he realized that more carnivores were being let go into the forest. A lot more than usual, which was very strange to him. It was no longer safe here, and he made the decision to escort his family out of the forest. From that day forward, Liebeck was on alert too. Of course, she was still a kid and was always curious, but she learned her father's every move. She never wanted to feel that helpless again, not able to help her mother. If she could be more like her dad, then one day, if Daddy wasn't around like he wasn't that night, she would be strong enough and powerful enough to scare those meanies away too. As they all went on their journey out of the forests, Liebeck took that time to get closer to her father, and despite his need to not want to feel weak by showing emotion, Thaliaman found himself growing ever more proud that his daughter wanted so badly to learn to be like him. The end.